I'm Reverend DeChant. I am an artist here in the neighborhood. I had heard the story that there was a great woodworker amongst us in our little village. And one day I knocked, probably in 1998, I knocked on the door of this artisan before you, George Berry. And he hollered out through the window, "Who is it?" And I said, well, my name's David. I hear that you're the greatest carpenter in all of Atlanta. And he said, "Oh, you must have misheard. I'm the greatest carpenter in the known universe." And that was my introduction to George Berry. I met him through woodworking. I've stuck with him because of spiritual reasons, and we'll get to that in time. But this is George Berry. George Berry.
Well, I thought you were using me because I have a master's degree in furniture design.
We'll get to that, sure. Important. Let's let that be known. From
Rochester Institute of Technology.
That's important. That's a good one. Your bona fides. We are in the arena of your creativity over the last 25 years or so. How many years of woodworking do you have under your belt?
I don't know. I've been saying 53 for 2 years now.
In that range?
Yeah. 1968.
Oh, I was born in 70.
I decided to be a furniture designer in 1968. And I also decided in 1968, if you were going to be a designer, you'd be a much better designer if you could build it. I started on the woodworking right then.
You mean it's not enough to put it on paper and call that your craft? You have to give the full, from idea to piece of furniture you want it to have happened. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. It didn't make any sense to me that you would design something that you couldn't build.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You'd have
to. You think architects do that?
All the time. That's one of the reasons I sort of turned down architecture, because you can have a great design, you can have a vision that is spectacular, but then you turn it over to somebody who's going to make it for you. At some point in that relationship, they're cross purposes. The architect wants the best conceivable job, and the craftsman who's making it wants the minimal acceptable job. That's cross purposes. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be involved in any of that. I didn't want to have a great vision and turn it over to somebody and let them screw it up.
Right.
So I decided if it was furniture, I could do it. Uh-huh. So I could design it and I could do it.
With all the skills you have, though, don't you have to restore somebody else's thing? Didn't that come along and you have to revarnish somebody's project from 1920 or whatever? Is that a thing?
I wanted to be a furniture designer. So I went to Georgia State and I said, I want to be a furniture designer. And they said, we don't have that program. Interior design, you can take interior design. So I took interior design and I went to the head of the department and said, I want to take interior design, but I just want a portfolio in furniture design so I can get a job as a furniture designer for a manufacturer. And he said, well, okay, all your independent study will be on furniture design. And he set up a little program for me. He said, I want you to do an antique restoration. I want you to do some piece of furniture that is upholstered, and we'll tailor your portfolio so you can get into graduate school. And I said, well, I don't want to go to graduate school. I want to design furniture. I don't want to be in school. And he said, well, if you don't graduate from Georgia State, you can't get into graduate school. And I didn't even think about going to graduate school. And I said, well, he's probably right. So I went ahead and graduated.
And then RIT has in place a Master of Woodworking degree, or did you have to go up there and invent that?
No, Master of Fine Art.
Oh.
That's the highest degree you can get in studio art. There's no doctorate of sculpture.
Right.
There's no doctorate of architecture.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
It's more imagination made real than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the time, there was maybe 7 schools in the country that offered an MFA in their art department in furniture design.
Mm-hmm.
Rhode Island School of Design was one of them. Everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, the Art Institute of Chicago, it was one of them. Somewhere in Indiana, there's a school, Aeromont. It has a master's degree. There's 2 or 3 others. But RIT had, at the time, Wendell Castle, who was a famous, still is, dead now, but a famous woodworker.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the artistic approach. He looked at furniture as utilitarian sculpture. It was sculpture first, and it was furniture second.
Someone needs to sit in it. It's a chair by definition, but before it's a chair, it's a work of art.
Function can follow form. Does form follow function? Is it more a piece of art or is it a piece of furniture?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had the sculptural approach, and he did quite well. He was in the top 10 in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up there for Wendell Castle because the professors at Georgia State had heard of him.
Of course, yeah.
So I went up there. I took sculpture in Georgia State, and the first sculpture that I did in Introduction 101 to Sculpture, the instructor said, "Oh, that's good, but that's Henry Moore. That's been done." I said, "Henry who?"
Oh boy.
So that S table that I have, it was one of the first things I did at RIT. I went up there a quarter early. Back then, college was in quarters,
Mm-hmm.
not semesters.
Mm-hmm.
Quarters is much better for the students. Semesters is much better for the administration. Then they only have to do it twice. Quarters, they got to do it 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's much better for the students because you're off between quarters. You can spring break all you want to.
Mm-hmm. What did you do in your semester up there, the early year that you went?
Oh, I instead of starting in the fall, I started in the winter.
Okay.
And I wanted to do sculptural furniture. So I went home every day from school and made clay models, plasticine models of furniture. 1 inch equals a foot.
Okay.
And I would take a block of styrofoam and shove wire into that styrofoam, and then then make an armature, and then put modeling clay, plasticine on the outside of that,
Right.
and smooth it off. You have clay working tools, you know, and so that's what I did. And I went in, and I had a workbench by the windows, and I sat those models on the windowsill, and people would come by and say, "Oh, what's that model?" And I say, "Well, this is so and so, and this is going to be mahogany right here." And
Prototypes.
yeah. And then it would be more like a vignette, or it'd be more like a scale model.
Right.
The
right.
prototype is full.
Yeah, I guess.
So I had one guy come by and he said, this is my workbench. When fall starts, this is my workbench. I already called it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that was the plan. And so I said, all right, fine with me. If that's the way you play your game up here, then I'll play by the rules. And I got another workbench. When you go to RIT, they give you a carver's bench. That is yours. That is your desk for your career at RIT. You build parts of furniture on the carver's bench, and then you put them all together on the floor or something. When you go to RIT, they give you a carver's bench. It is, in the carver's bench, there's a toolbox mounted on the walls that have double doors on it. Inside that toolbox is every hand tool you would need to make a piece of furniture. So you can't say, I couldn't do it because I didn't have the tool.
Right.
There's the tools. You have a carver's bench, all the clamps and stuff all over carver's bench, so you can attack it from every angle. And you have a box of tools. Those tools are inventoried. And when you leave RIT, they come and take an inventory of your toolbox, and you have to buy every tool that's not there.
Sure.
So I took my toolbox with me, and it was double doors, and it hung on the wall. And I left the RIT toolbox locked. And I just used my toolbox at RIT.
Mm-hmm. Now, what year was that?
That was 70. I graduated from Georgia State in 75, and I graduated from RIT in 79.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably 77 or 78.
So that was the tools for furniture making up until that point. Obviously, there were no CNC machines. You didn't have...
There are no computers and nothing you plugged in.
Oh, okay.
All the hand tools.
And for the previous 500 years, those same
you are
tools
correct,
have
sir.
been making furniture.
Right. And they were some of the best manufacturers all over the world.
Sure.
Hand tools. And it takes more skill to do it with a hand tool. Mm-hmm. So they wanted you, first of all, for your first piece of furniture, first project up there, you couldn't use electricity. You had, this is not for the graduate students, this was for undergraduate students.
I see.
The first thing you had to do was by hand. You had to make a project totally by hand, no electricity. And then after that, you had power tools. The school had the power tools. And you'd go into the shop and go into the tool room, and you could take out an electric drill, you could check out a saber saw, any kind of hand tools. You didn't have to buy those, but I had all the tools. I took them with me. And I had a corner bench. I thought it was better than the one by the window anyway. It was a corner. I was off to myself. And I had two walls to work with. So I started that way.
How many students were there in that program? And those were turners and joiners and carvers, all?
32 workbenches, 32 toolboxes. And that was for undergraduate and graduate students.
Okay.
They had a machine room where all the machines were. They had bench rooms where all the benches were. Like the carver's benches filled up a whole room, and they had another room full of carver's benches. And that was pretty much it. They said that the shop cost $1 million. The machines in their shop cost $1 million. And once a month, everybody would pull maintenance on one machine. So you learned a different machine to do maintenance on it.
I remember you telling me once at lunch you could tell who the carvers were because they would shave their arms to check the sharpness of their chisels and that sort of thing, and little bits and bobs like that.
Well, you could tell who the woodworkers were in the college, the whole college. If you were sitting with somebody at the cafeteria table in the student union,
right?
You could tell who the woodworkers were because they had patches shaved on their arm. They would sharpen a wood chisel.
Yeah.
And then they'd strop the chisel.
Sure.
And the whole purpose of the exercise was to make it razor sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And to test the sharpness, they would just make sure they could shave hair off their arms with it, and that was sharp. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a woodworker who was a visiting artist who came from London, who was famous in London. And one of the students asked him, when he was talking about sharpening his chisels, how do you test the sharpness of your chisels? And he said, on my fingernail. Mm. On the back of my fingernail. If you can lift up a little piece of fingernail with your chisels.
Mercy.
Then, well, he's talking about a piece the size of dandruff.
Mm-hmm.
So they stopped doing that then. So you couldn't tell anymore.
I know Abe Lincoln once said something smarter than it's going to sound coming out of me, but if you're chopping down trees for an hour, 45 minutes should be dedicated to sharpening your axe. Or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was something like that because it's 25 minutes out of an hour.
Okay, interesting.
If you're carving a block of wood and you're carving a full-size pietà in that,
right,
then you're going to have an apprentice sharpening your
right.
chisels at all times. Because if you were doing it alone, you'd
yes.
have to spend 25% of your time
yes.
Sharpening.
And there's pyramid builders who were chiseling stone with copper tools, for God's sakes, and somebody's full-time job was to bring them a sharpened tool. Every strike they made was on a sharp tool.
But of course,
ideally that would be great in the woodworking world, but you know, you got to do it all these days.
The latest theory on that is that the quarry that they quarried stone in was underwater. They would wait till the Nile flooded, and then the quarry that they cut the stones on was flooded. And it's much easier to cut stone if it's underwater.
If it's wet.
Yeah, because if you cut stone today, you got to have a wet saw or you're in a cloud of dust.
And sharpening tools involves an oil or a water as well.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's easier to cut it when it's underwater. And when you have this big stone cut and it's underwater, then they made air pockets out of animal bladders. And they filled them with air and they strapped them to this stone until it was lighter than the water, until the stone itself was floating. And then they floated it all the way to the pyramid. All the way to the base of the pyramid, they floated the stone. No rollers, no slaves in the front with big long lines and ropes. None of that. 2 guys could float it in water all the way to the base of the pyramid.
Stone pusher. I'm a stone pusher.
Well, they were walking on it. They were pushing it. Walking on the bottom and pushing it. They made a stone trough all the way. And when it got to the pyramids, now they had to lift it.
Right.
So they made an airtight wooden box all the way to the top of the pyramid and filled that box with water. And they made a valve, a gate, and they pulled the gate up, floated the rock in there, put the gate down, and then
like a lock system.
A lock system, and there was a gate right. You know, if you put a glass in water in the sink and you turn the glass upside down and fill it, and you can pull it all the way out of the water, and there's still water inside the glass. Air pressure pushes it into the glass. So that's the way they got it up the hill with the air pressure, and then they put the stone in there, and it floated to the top. And that the top layer is where they wanted it. And they floated it over to put in place.
So wait, where are the aliens, though? I thought the aliens made the pyramid.
No.
Humans did.
Yes. Significantly advanced technology can appear like godlike powers to the low-tech people.
That's right.
So they think it was godlike power, getting that big, heavy stone, tons of rock way up there. It had to take godlike powers to do that.
You're right.
But
we jump to that conclusion a lot. You know, Stonehenge and all of these things. Clearly humans did it.
Correct.
Why do we jump to the conclusion that humans could not have done this? Because we don't know how to do it. We can't imagine they knew how to do it.
True. And it doesn't take long for the technology to be lost. They built the pyramids. Humans built the pyramids with their own hands. And 4 or 5 generations, and it's lost.
Right.
They didn't know how to do it. They had to come up with some way of doing it.
That's why we still have theories about how it was done, even though it was documented in pictographs and things like that. And there's still questions remain about every great monument out there.
And Elon says the window of opportunity to go to Mars might not be open for a long time. They built the pyramids in a couple of generations. They forgot how to do it.
Right.
So we got to go.
Right.
Now.
I think more information is lost about stonework than woodwork. I think woodwork led to you getting a certain set of tools in your graduate work. You know what I mean? Like that had been continuous. We've always used wood all this time, but stone presents its own problems, and we've forgotten how to do it. Machu Picchu and everything else. How do they get those perfectly fitting walls made without lasers, without sanders, without all the things we use? We can't do it, or it would take a long time to do it now.
They had a recipe for concrete, and they didn't carve those stones. They molded them in place.
Poured them.
Right.
That's a theory.
That's a theory. Now, the story of my graduate thesis. When you go to graduate school, you build different projects. The first one they want by hand. You can't use electricity. But then after that, you're free. So I had been a cabinet maker, and I wanted to do some cabinet work to further my finances in graduate school. So the student union wanted a display case on their in their entrance hall. They had big concrete steps behind and a big concrete wall there. It had the imprint of the boards that made the concrete.
Okay, yeah.
So it looked like wooden boards. And they wanted a
They had
big...
awards and trophies and stuff in the
Correct.
Oh, okay.
They wanted a trophy case there.
Okay.
And so I said, well, I can build you one. And the guy said, well, okay. Give me a drawing and how much it's going to cost. And I did a drawing and told him how much it was going to cost. And he said, all right. And then one of the instructors got wind of it and nixed the deal. He went over and said, we don't know who this person is. We don't know anything about him. It's not a good idea to let a student do work for the school. So that job got
canned.
Yes, trash canned. And the reason he gave me was that the whole cabinet was plywood and it had glass shelves inside of it, had a light in the top of it, so it went right through all the glass shelves.
Sure.
And we got into a little discussion about the joinery involved because the center petition was coming down and it was in the middle of the bottom. I would have knocked that glass over. It was in the middle of the bottom and it was coming down in a T. And he said, if there's a lot of weight on that, the shelves are on that, whatever's on the shelves is on that petition, and the weight itself is on the petition, and that's going to be a hard thing to do with just a dado. And so I said, well, that will hold 1,000 pounds. He said, oh no. oh no. So before I graduated, I have to do, the last piece of furniture you do is your thesis piece. Your thesis, like any other thesis in graduate school, has to add to the body of knowledge. That's the deal. It must add to the body of knowledge.
You can't just copy a Federalist chair and graduate with that. You had to do something new.
That took where the giants had walked and make it a little higher.
Right.
Put one more leaf on the tree of knowledge.
Okay.
So that to me means it has to be original. Now, you could, and many students did this, your thesis can be chronological order of what you did when you were in graduate school. One piece, why you did that piece, next piece, leading to the next piece, leading to the next piece, and you just do a thesis that we can say add to the body of knowledge because that's never been done. Nobody ever built that before.
Right.
But I thought that it should be one more leaf. And so I went back to that cabinet that was on the display case, made out of plywood. Of course, at RIT, all the furniture is solid wood.
Sure.
Plywood is looked down upon.
And nowadays we veneer plywood. We put a little tiny strip of walnut on the front to make it appear like the whole thing is walnut, but it's just plywood with some strips on it. Yeah.
And some of those strips are heat sensitive. You pull the tape off and you iron on there.
Okay, yeah.
So it got down to the cabinet you just bought was a piece of furniture I built from the thesis piece.
Yes.
But I wanted to add more to the body of knowledge than something I thunk up. So I went back to that hold 1,000 pounds. And I said, I know that dado joint in the bottom of that cabinet is going to hold 1,000 pounds. So to prove that, I made a whole bunch of samples, pieces of plywood, 6 inches wide, a foot high and a foot long. I cut a dado right in the middle of it and glued those pieces together and make a T. And I decided that when cabinets are ruined, when cabinets are damaged beyond repair, or when cabinets are hurt tremendously, they're torn apart. Mm-hmm. They're torn apart from the front edge. Mm-hmm. You know, something hits the top edge, yeah, and it breaks right there.
All the strength is on the back, on the wall, and it's overloaded, and somebody hung on it.
And the front edge is what breaks.
Off. Yeah.
So I took a big piece of steel and laid it on the front edge and drilled a hole in it and put an eye bolt through it and had a chain hooked onto the eye bolt. And I did the same thing at the top of the top piece, the vertical piece. Mm-hmm. I strapped it on both sides with a piece of steel and ran the piece of steel up and put a bolt through it and put a chain on it. So I was actually set back from the edge, and I was breaking it from the front edge. I was pulling it apart from the front edge. Uh-huh. And I took it over to the strength of materials laboratory in the engineering department. And went to a professor and said, I have this problem. I want to test the strength of joints on wooden pieces. Can I use the strength of materials lab? Can I get some kind of independent study credit for it? And will you help me set it all up? And he said, sounds like a plan to me. And I made a whole bunch of sample joints, just a whole bunch of them. I made 25 of them. And I changed something on every one of them. I would go over, well, I had some standard ones. Mm-hmm. So I'd have a control group.
Right.
And it didn't take me long to find out. I'd go over to his administrator, and he was the kind of professor who wore a white lab coat all the time.
Engineers are that way. Yeah.
Right. You used to tell an engineer because he had a slide rule hanging from his belt. And he said I had it so I could hook it up to the machine easy. And that machine has a big dial indicator on it. You know, a huge dial indicator.
Pounds
of force.
Yeah.
And it just keeps on going up until it stops when it breaks. Uh-huh. So we did that. We did that for 4 weeks. I just,
break stuff.
I'd come in and, break it. I'd come in and dream up some new joint. I came with all sorts of ways I could do it. You have a T, you're making a T like that. You're making a T like that. So you go underneath it and drill holes in the bottom and put a 3/4 inch, a 5/8 inch dowel on an angle. So you're making a dovetail inside the wood by putting those on an angle. And I'd come up with different ways of doing it. I even strapped a steel on the bottom and ran big screws through that steel up into the partition in the middle.
Yeah.
And of course, I had learned by that time you set the screws on an angle. You don't put them straight. So, and I would do all that. The whole thing was do it without resorting to steel. It's a wooden joint. So I did that, but I did steel just to see how much stronger it was. So I had all sorts of things. And I started out with a control group. So what I did was I made one dado that I could stick the petition in, and it was just snug fit. I mean, it would go in without force, and it would pull out like breaking the pull of a magnet or something like that. It was sort of perfectly done, and then perfectly out. And then I made one that was sloppy, that had a dado that would not pass instructor's
a bad cut
scrutiny.
Yeah.
For plywood joinery. It was just way off. And then I made one that was so tight you had to drive it in with a hammer, but you didn't, you could drive it in there without breaking it or anything. But you had to use a mallet to get it in there.
But still all wood on wood.
Wood on wood. Everything's wood on wood. From now on, it's all wood on wood. I took them over there, and when I glued them, I was using Franklin tack bond glue on everything. So I took them over there, and I was amazed that the sloppy one was stronger. It was the strongest because it left room for the glue to exist. Like you say, wood on wood. Well, it turns out it's not as strong if it's wood on wood, because you have to leave room for the glue, and that is not what is taught at RIT. If you're making a dovetail joint, and most of dovetail joints in modern furniture are exposed on the corners of a cabinet works, but on classical furniture, most dovetail joints are hidden. They're half blind. You don't see them on the face of the drawer. You see them on the edge of the drawer. So they're half blind. So the thought among the professors was that joint had to be so tight that you had to drive it in with a hammer. You put glue on it, you drove it in with a hammer, and that was it, because it's never as strong then. It's strong then, as strong then it's ever going to be. You don't keep taking it apart, and you don't stop halfway down and take it apart. So you drive it in with a mallet or drive it in with a hammer. And that was what everybody tried to do. And I took it over there. I took plywood, which there wasn't a whole lot of plywood at RIT. I was under a different school of thought in that for some uses, plywood is superior to solid wood.
Absolutely.
So I went back and I said, well, geez, this is crazy. The sloppy one was better. So I started changing the design. And then I started changing how sloppy it was. Feeler gauge, in a car, when you used to set the spark gap, you had a feeler gauge, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000ths of an inch. You'd stick that little piece of metal in there, and it said 1,000 on it. It said 2,000 on it. So you'd stick those feeler gauges in there.
Micro, tiny lengths.
You're right.
Distances.
The last one's almost foil. I mean, you can bend it. So I would stick feeler gauges in there, and I went over with 1,000ths on both sides, 2,000ths on both sides, 3,000ths on both sides, and tested it that way, and found out that 2,000 is stronger than 1,000 or 3,000. So if you must have room for the glue to exist, and it should be somewhere around 2,000ths of an inch.
So you added chemistry to the wood on wood idea.
It's all physics as far as I was concerned.
But isn't it true that something that you've perfectly measured and documented at 2/1000 of an inch. If you went out to lunch and came back, it might be different
You are correct, sir.
because of ambient moisture.
You are so correct, sir. Now, plywood doesn't move as much as solid wood moves.
Mm.
And MDF is pretty stable unless you get it wet.
Right.
So I had a reasonable estimate. I didn't say it was 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I said in my thesis conclusion that it's between 1,000 and 3,000.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There could be 2,500 for all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't test that. So, but the fact that the glue, you had to make room for the glue to exist if you wanted the strongest joint when it comes to pulling that joint apart a week later.
Mm-hmm. And are we talking about old school white glue or yellow glue?
We're talking about Franklin Tight Bond,
Uh-huh.
yellow glue.
Okay.
Franklin Tight Bond,
Uh-huh.
which is all they used at RIT.
Okay.
Franklin Tight Bond.
So, did you go back to that professor with your results, or did you go ahead and make the display cabinet?
No, the display cabinet was long gone.
Oh, okay.
And I had a great design for it too. And it was all plywood.
Uh-huh.
I hid the edge of the plywood with solid strip, but you couldn't tell it wasn't solid oak. It was white oak, unstained.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd made a lot of joints, and I carried them over there across campus with all the joints on a chain. They all had a chain, and I'd carry them over there and test them and carry them back and make new ones. They were all over my workbench and stuff. And every time it broke, I would write down. I had a big chart and the description of the joint and what it was, and where it broke on the chart. And I had I probably tested 50 different things. There were 2 pages of breaking points, and I said, well, I think I've learned what I need to learn. I know what I'm doing now. Here's my charts, and I'll see you later. He said, no, that's not the way engineers do this.
Uh-huh.
You hand me these papers with your charts on there, and then you tell me what they prove.
Uh-huh.
You have to write down
Yeah.
what these charts are proving,
Right.
and then I check it.
What's your interpretation of
You
the
are
data,
correct, sir.
not his.
Uh-huh. So, okay, I had to go back and do that. And then I got independent study A because he thought I had discovered something, And I did too.
That's your new leaf.
I thought I had discovered something.
Right.
That's the leaf
Uh-huh.
on the tree of knowledge. So now there were 2 instructors at RIT, the department head and the department.
Uh-huh.
So they took turns teaching classes to students. The professor was a past cabinet maker too, who did a lot of plywood work. He supposedly knew more about plywood. The department head knew classical woodworking joinery.
Mm-hmm.
His pieces were modern, but he knew classical joinery,
Right.
classical work. Teg Freed, does that name anything to you?
Nope.
He wrote books on classical woodworking joinery.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a lot of books that Taunton Press, Fine Woodworking Magazine,
Okay.
was originally published by Taunton Press, the guy who had the workbench next to my workbench at RIT, oh no, I took his workbench when he left.
Oh, that was the guy.
I took his workbench when he left. And he went to start Fine Woodworking Magazine. Ted Freed wrote a lot of articles for him about classical woodwork and joinery. And then they combined that into a book. He's the Grand Master. So I knew that the department head wasn't going to like the fact that I said you have to have the glue of space for the glue to exist, and that has to be between 1/1000 and 3/1000 of an inch.
Because it'll just squish out if it's
too tight. You squish all the
yeah
glue away.
There's no glue in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I did have the caveat that all I can say is that it's stronger if you just did it and then you pulled it apart. Because I was just doing it and the glue dried overnight, and that was all it did, was dry overnight. And so I pulled it apart with 24 hours drying time.
Right.
You know, if it could be stronger if it was 15 days drying time.
Right.
I didn't check that.
Right.
But I had my thesis, and you know, I am not a man of letters. So writing the thesis took me I had to lock myself in my apartment for 2 weeks. I didn't go anywhere for 2 weeks, and I wrote it out longhand.
Right.
And
I should say you're dyslexic, right? That's part of the problem.
yeah, well, I've been dyslexic so long it's normal.
Right.
So I wrote the whole thing out, and I had I included a photostatic copy of every piece of furniture I did at RIT, because that was okay. And I also included the research that I did on strength of material laboratory. Mm-hmm. And that was in there too. So I knew that the department head was not going to like this, because he said, this is the way you cut a dovetail joint on a drill press. And he went over and he clamped a board to the top of the drill press, and then you took a gent saw, a dovetail saw, and started cutting the dovetail joint on the drill press.
Yeah.
So you cut a dovetail joint by hand.
Yeah, but
and
he thought that profile was the standard, and a router's profile was an aberration or something, or
no, the standard. You mean the angle of the dovetail?
Yeah.
That angle is softwood or hardwood. The softwood is 1:6, is less than 1:6, and hardwood is more than 1:6.
Okay.
Anyway, he was the one who would tell his students, you get a rubber mallet and you drive these dovetails home, mm-hmm. and they're perfectly flush. Mm-hmm. You don't sand off anything. Mm-hmm. They're perfectly flush, they drive it home, and they'll never be as strong as they are right then. So never take it apart again. I've seen him say that to students. And when I said, now wait a minute, there's 0.02 of an inch here somewhere. Uh-huh. And 0.02 of an inch seems like it's small. But if you're feeling it, you can feel the hell out of that.
Well, and on a molecular level, that's
a lot of molecules.
A lot of molecules. Right?
So I finished my thesis, and at the time, which was a godsend for me, the English department at RIT would correct your thesis for free. Mm. So you had a graduate student, a graduate student in English. Mm-hmm. I said, here's my thesis. And they would correct it for spelling for sure.
Yeah, editing more than correcting, if you will.
You are right, sir. They would say this is a split infinitive.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good thing. So it's all typed out. It was grammatically and spelling correct, and it was a pretty big hunk of paper, and it was stapled together. And I came into his office. I said, "Well, here's my thesis. You're not going to like it." And that afternoon, I was looking out the window of the bench room, and I saw him with a paper in his hand. I will have to say marching across campus. He was marching like he was a man with a purpose. And I later found out that he went to the engineering professor and asked him if those figures proved what he said. And the engineering professor said, "Well, yeah, I was actually running the machine at the time. I put it in the machine. I stood back. I pressed the button, and he wrote down the number where it stopped. But there's nothing that either one of us could do to affect the number."
Right.
And so he said, looked to him like that paragraph of what I approved was right. And he told me that later.
The lab coat guy.
The lab coat guy told me that later. The professor, I never talked to him much again. He never said anything to me about it. The instructor, he did say that I was right, that that's the way a cabinet gets broken. It's broken from the corner. It's broken from the outside edge, gets pulled apart some way.
Yeah.
He said, "I agree with that. That's the right approach. That's the way it happens in the real world."
Mm-hmm.
So he agreed with that much of it. But the professor, the department head, had been there longer. He had been there when Wendell Castle was there. And he was technically more advanced woodworker. He knew more about working wood than anybody in the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
Wendell Castle had the artistic approach. He was a sculptor and then became a woodworker.
Mm-hmm.
So he cared more about the form of the piece than he cared about craftsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
Craftsmanship was just a means to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And the department head cared more about craftsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
So,
someone writes the ballet and someone else dances the ballet, but it's he who created the thing that is the true artist, if you will.
I kind of think the guy who had the vision, the guy who thunk it up, it was in that guy's mind before it was made real.
Right.
He's the artist.
Right.
Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge.
Yeah.
So I don't think he liked it. I know he didn't like it. But it was a grade A, meaning it was an A. I had to get a grade on it because it was a requirement of my degree. So I made it okay. I made it through there with all my body parts intact.
I remember, I'm not sure about when you're living on a ship came into play, but I do remember you telling me after RIT you would backpack around with tools in your backpack, and when you arrived at a place you would make a thing or fix a thing as part of your pay? Is that an accurate memory? Dragging around a heavy circ saw or something like that?
That was before RIT.
Oh, okay.
That was before Georgia State.
Oh, okay.
That was after I got out of the Army.
Well, throughout the years, as I've under your tutelage as a woodworking mentor of mine, you have often quoted professors at RIT, and you've said, now this guy did it this way and I do it this way, and I do remember the importance of this and all of that, and it culminates at some point in you making a collection of videos for woodworkers, the Wood Guy series. And I was asking you the other day how many of those there were and how long they are and all of that. Is it
a dozen?
There's a dozen films.
Yeah.
An hour long-ish or whatever.
Yeah. I originally started out saying, after I'd been working wood for 15 years, I started saying, I have learned a lot of tricks that I learned watching other woodworkers, especially at RIT, and nobody ever told me those tricks. You just see it. One word to the wise is enough.
Right.
So you just see it, and God, I wish I knew that earlier.
Well,
I
that's
wish somebody
sort of
told
like
me that.
what the field teaches you. What you learn X amount in a classroom under the controlled, where you're building things for a purpose. And then when you enter the real world and you're building things for a paycheck, there's different rules at play, I suppose. But
I would think so. But the thing about putting a backpack on my back with a handsaw hanging out of the backpack, when I got out of the Army, I always said that when I turn 21, I will decide on my career. I have enough time to decide. When I was in high school, I wanted to be whoever a Playboy bunny dated. And I sort of included money in that.
Yeah, right.
So I wanted to say, well, I'm a math whiz, and I will be an insurance actuary, and they make tons of money. And
the chicks dig them.
And I'm not so sure that the chicks are flocking around the block to date an insurance actuary. But when I was in the Army in Miami, Florida, and I was still thinking actuary at the time, but I was still a woodworker. I was still a hobbyist. In every Army post, in every Air Force base, there is a wood shop open to the soldiers or the airmen or the sailors. There's always a pool table, there's always a ping pong table, and there's always a wood shop somewhere. So I'd make things in their wood shop. And I would make things that I would wind up using in my Army job. So when I got out of school 3 months early because I was registered in college and I wanted to go to college. 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I was in the Army, and I was 21 years old when I got out of the Army. So I went back to Auburn and I said, well, I got to pick a profession because I'm 21. I can't put it off any longer. I'm back in college. Pick a profession, kid.
Yeah.
And I had insurance actuary high on the list. I thought I would be a good lawyer. I thought I would be a good surgeon. And I then thought, well, I've got a propensity for working wood. I would be good at designing furniture. But you can't design furniture without having artistic talent. And no one has ever told me about my artistic talent.
Mm.
So when I got out early to go to college, I signed up for Design 101. And I thought, well, if I take Design 101 and I do all right in it, then I'll design and build furniture and see how that works. So I took Design 101, and I was the only A in the class. And I had students who would come up to me when I was working on a project in lab. Lab is when you work on a art department has a lab. It's not a lab, it's where you draw. Mm-hmm. So I'd be in lab, and they would come up beside me and say, you know, this is the worst professor in the art department. He never gives an A. You don't expect to get an A. If you want an A for some average, for your grade point average, drop it. Drop this course. So I was the only A in the class, so I said, well, okay, you got talent, kid, so you can go this routine. You can build furniture for a living. Mm-hmm. So if you got talent. And I thought, well, how am I going to learn woodworking? And when I was in the Army, I was in Miami, Florida. And I took college courses at night at Miami-Dade Junior College. I wanted to work off my first year of college. In 3 years, I was in the Army. So that's when quarter system works a lot better. Mm-hmm. So I asked the first sergeant, I'm taking a college course, and it's only taught on Thursday afternoon. Can I take that course? And he said, well, yeah. Army's happy when their students take college courses. We're more than happy. So you can take it. And he said, well, and what is the course? And I said, sailing. He said, well, okay. He laughed, but he said, okay. So I took sailing while I was still in the Army. And then I got out of the Army 3 months early to go to Auburn. I went to Auburn for 3 months, and then I hitchhiked back to Miami with a knapsack and put up a sign on the bulletin board at the yacht club saying, wanted to crew on overseas trip. I wanted to go to London, and I wanted to crew on a sailboat going to London. And I put that up at the yacht club. And then some guy called me and said, well, I just got a sailboat. We'll be going to London in about 3 or 4 months. I have to work on the boat first. If you want to come and work on my boat, then we'll go to London. I said, all right. So I went to work on his boat, and I was scrubbing the decks and doing this and doing that. And I worked all day long on his boat. And then I had somebody else in the yacht club come over to me while I was taking a break or something. He said, you know, this guy's not going to London. This guy's never left this slip right here. He just bought that boat. The only time he's ever used that boat is he was still tied up at the dock, and he was testing out the motor to see how it steered. He was still tied up, and he cranked up the motor and did the tiller back and forth every now and then, and he undercut the dock, undercut the concrete at the dock. And they had to fix the dock. This guy is not going sailing. This guy is not a sailor. But the boat itself won the transatlantic race. It was the Antares. Antares is one of the stars in Orion's belt. Not a sign of the zodiac, but it's a red star. And he bought the boat. He sold real estate. And the guy came over and he said, now I am going to London. I can't pay you anything. I can give you room and board. And we're going to sail to London. And then I'm getting off there. We're stopping there. Mm-hmm. I said, that's exactly what I want. I'm going to backpack through Europe. That's my goal. Mm-hmm. So that's good. So I quit the job on his boat and got on the other guy's boat. And he was going to London too. He was going to Europe. And I said, hot dog, let's go. And he said, now the way we're going to do it is we're going to cross the Gulf Stream and go to Bimini. Then we're going to go diving around Bimini for a while. And then we're going to get on the outskirts of Bimini and we're going to wait for a cold front to come through from the north. When a cold front comes south that far, the wind blows around the compass. Wind, cold front is circulating wind. The high pressure area, low pressure area circles in different directions. So he said when a cold front comes down this far, the wind blows around the compass. So we'll just wait till we get a good east wind and we're going straight out into the Atlantic as far as we can sail on that east wind. Mm. Then we're going to catch the trade winds and then we're going to sail into London.
Sounds like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I said, well, that sounds like a plan. So we got to Bimini. And that was the first time I got on the boat with him. He was taking a friend of his to Bimini. And the friend just wanted to sail. So he said to me, go down below and there's a hose that's down in the bilge down below. And the bilge is full of water because this is a wooden boat and it leaks. And I'm going to pump the water out of the bilge when you're holding the hose down into the bilge. And I said, all right. So I went down there and I held the hose in the bilge until it was all pumped dry. Then I left the hose right there in the bilge and said, it's dry. He said, all right. And then he said, then we were sitting in the cockpit with 3 guys were sitting in the cockpit and we were sailing to Bimini. And he charted his course. The way he knew his course was he had a Bahamas guide which told him the frequency of the radio station at Bimini. And when he would hold up a transistor radio and turn it like this, and wherever it was the loudest, that was perpendicular. That was Bimini, that way. So that's the way we sailed to Bimini. And so he went back, the other guy went back to Miami, and we were sitting outside of Bimini waiting for the cold front to come through. It was listening to the radio, the wind coming in, the cold front was coming through. And when you're actually waiting for a cold front, you feel it. You feel the change in temperature. If you're outside in the ocean, on the water, and the cold front hits, it gets cold right away. So the wind starts blowing. We get get easterly wind, and we're going straight out west. We had a spinnaker flying. A spinnaker's a big sail in the front when you go in with the wind. And we were making time.